Good morning. It's Tuesday, August 31st. This is the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. Welcome to this end of summer committee meeting. If I could ask for a adoption of the agenda, please. So moved. Lynn Lund. And welcome to committee members. We have Sunny Gallant. Welcome, Sunny, to Public Accounts. Lynn Lund, Gord McNeely, Bethany MacLeod, and Corey Deagle. And then our clerk today is Alicia. And then we have with us the team from the Department of Education. So we had requested a briefing on the 2021 International Student Program audit recommendations following the presentation from the Auditor General, and we had asked him his team a number of questions, and then that led to having the department come in. So we really appreciate you as a team being able to come in and do that. The committee was very clear that we wanted to hear from you before the beginning of the school year because there were some very specific time-sensitive issues that were raised. So perhaps if I just welcome and introduce you, and then we'll go into your presentation, and then we'll wait for committee, if it's okay to wait for questions at the end. That'd be okay. So we have with us Deputy Minister Bethany MacLeod, Derek McEwen, Director of International Education, John Cummings, hi John, Executive Director of Educational Services, and Janet Perry-Payne, hi, EAL Program Administrator. So thanks again for all of you taking the time out of your schedules to be here, and I think if you're ready to go, we'll hand it over to you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
So thank you for the opportunity to come and talk to you about just what the PEI International Student Program is about. So we'll give you a quick overview of that and also talk about the implementation of the recommendations that the AG has laid out for us. And I'll pass it over to Derek to start.
Thank you. Yes, we appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk about the International Student Program. And the first few slides are just a little bit of a Coles note, no pun intended, on the International Student Program and kind of what we do. And then the latter part will be speaking specifically to the recommendations from the auditor.
Great. And just to interrupt for one moment, the mics will come on when you speak. If you can, like you just did, introduce yourself, so that for the handset it really helps with that. But they're not, they don't enhance your voice. So you need to, if you can project, it does really, especially with the shielding, it does really help.
Put on my coaching voice.
That's right, put on the teaching voice, yeah. Thank you.
Just pretend you're yelling at me, Derek.
No, we don't want that.
Oh, I think there's a story there, yeah.
Now this was working when I first came in, and it's now not advancing. Oh, here we go. There we go.
There you go.
So the Prince Edward Island International Student Program was created in 2012 to deliver K-12 public education opportunities to the global community. And although the ISP program was formally named and created in 2012, fee-paying international students have been involved in our system for quite some time. That would go back probably 20 years having fee-paying students, but the actual ISP program was formalized in 2012. And when we think about international students, we kind of have two broad categories, and it was from the questions that were asked when the Auditor General was here, we felt it was important to sort of clarify who we're talking about when we're talking about international students, and who we're talking about when we're talking about students in the International Student Program. So when we have international students, we have students who are fee-paying and students who are non-fee paying. And on the non-fee paying category, those would include students of parents who have permanent resident status, a parent or parents have a work permit, a study permit, or they have refugee status. And when we're making a determination of fee paying and non-fee paying, we're following the Education Act, which outlines who is entitled to public education without paying tuition and who needs to pay tuition. So that's sort of our guiding document there. And then there's also the federal border regulations, who the federal government allows in and may be coming into our office that we might not have previously known about. But they were able to, through visitor visa or some mechanism with the federal border, they've arrived in PEI. And now we're going to make the distinction between whether they are fee-paying and non-fee paying. So sometimes the process works very well that we know in advance. And sometimes the processes work that we're not always aware in advance of who is arriving. And Janet's going to speak to the next two slides.
The EAL Welcome Centre was established in 2007 as a result of increased population growth and a desire to increase population growth on PEI. It was designed to receive students who are entering both the English stream and the French stream. And so we have received students from every category over those 15 years. And we support students through language support, through cultural support, just transitional support in the school system. And we work closely with our partners in immigration, with the Association of Newcomers to Canada, and with all of our partners in the school system to continue to monitor how the students are doing in schools. What's interesting, Derek just mentioned this, international students can be fee-paying or non-fee-paying, or move to a non-fee-paying structure. And it's one of the reasons that happens is you can have a student come into the province who may be coming in on a visitor visa, but their plan is actually to move towards an immigration status. So they might have to pay fees as a visitor to PEI, but as their immigration status changes, they become non-fee-paying students. And we're certainly seeing a decline in the number of people that would have to pay fees if they were coming in to immigrate just because of the new immigration programs. So the fact that now people can come in, obtain a work permit or a study permit first, eliminates that need to have a visitor visa.
So now within the category of the fee-paying international students, we talk about students who require homestay and students who do not require homestay. And in the no homestay category, we would have students who are staying with their parents or students who are staying with a family, a friend, a relative that's been arranged previously by the family. Here's where a federal rule comes in. All students studying in Canada who are not accompanied by a parent under the age of 17 must have custodial documents. And a custodian, that's federally regulated. There's two forms that have to be filled out. There's a form that's notarized in the home country that's filled out by the family and says, this person is going to be the custodian of my child, this is where they live, this is the address, etc. And in the receiving country, the custodian has to have a form filled out and notarized as well. So those custodianship forms are required by the federal government in order to get into the country. And then at our intake meeting, either if it's my staff or the EAL FAL staff, we require to see that custodial document. Federal rules allow any student under the age of 17 to come. Our rule for PEI is that a student in K-6 must be accompanied by a parent. Other jurisdictions would arrange homestay for K-6 students, and we've made the decision, and that's been the long-standing decision, that K-6 students here must be accompanied by a parent. We will not entertain homestay situations for K-6 students. And then the other one, even though the federal regulation is the age of 17, if we have a student who is over 17 in the PEI ISP program attending a public high school, we still maintain that they have to have a custodian. So we don't have an international student at 18 getting his apartment or her apartment and attending Charlottetown Road or Colonel Grey, living on their own. So those are two pieces that we have in addition to what the federal regulation would be. So that's kind of a little summary of the international program and the framework that we use to make our decisions. When the audit did their work, they really concentrated on the international student program. So when you think about the program side of it, it would be the type of student who wants to come to Prince Edward Island for a year, study in a homestay environment, and return after that 1 year, very much program oriented. So our policies, our May 31st deadline, all of those things are very neat and clear and fit very well in those situations. And then when we look at the other students who fit into some of those immigration categories or visitor visa categories, those students may arrive in July or August. So obviously they've missed the May 31st deadline. But one of the things that we do is, obviously we're all educators, so we very much have a student-centered approach, and we try to make decisions with the student's best interest in mind, and we have to follow the Education Act, and we have to follow federal policies as well. And we try to balance all of those things when we're making our decisions. I think one of the key recommendations that was made was around homestay, and we absolutely agree that the homestay is a critical component of a successful program. Even though we don't have a paper policy yet with a provider or providers, we recognize that that is an important step. We have 3 homestay providers working in the province this year, and we are very familiar with all 3. We know the policies that all 3 have. So it's not that people are coming and we have no idea where they're going. So right now, where we are with the homestay, we had put forth a submission to Treasury Board that was denied. So the RFP process is still active. So it's hard to talk a lot about an active process when we're still maintaining the policies and respecting the procurement process. But it's our goal to have the homestay decisions completed by December of 2021 so that we are set to go for our students in 2022. And I know there would be an immediate concern about what are we doing for the students that we have this September. Like I said, we have 3 homestay companies that are serving our students who require homestay services this year. We have 43 new confirmed students attending our program starting in September. 31 of those students require homestay services. We know where all 31 of those students are. We have excellent relationships with the homestay companies. We have communication with the host families. We have strong communication with the schools. We've identified to the schools that these students are ISP students. They are homestay students. They have a custodian. All of that information is readily shared with the school. It might be the youth worker who's attached to international students at that particular school. It might be the vice principal who's attached to international students at that particular school. But we have that working relationship, and we always have very good contact with the situation. So we are always aware of who our homestay students are, where they are, how they're doing in school, and how the homestay is going. We have had situations in the past where we've been communicated by the host families or the schools. We've supported them with either educational or behavioral. That communication system is definitely there, and we're comfortable that we are doing a great job for the wellness and well-being of our students. Another additional piece that we have this year, and I'll speak to it a little bit in depth, but we have a new insurance provider, and within that comes a 24/7 mental health awareness hotline. So that is an additional avenue that students will have, all international students, whether they're in homestay or not, but all international students will have access to as part of the insurance program that we have as well. We've acquired True North. It's a software system that's widely used across the country. It's secure, multi-user, web-based, and a lot of the administrative and managerial aspects that the audit found, True North will significantly help with those issues. Most of our processes had been person hours, paper forms, individual emails, and trying to track all of those things was a difficult challenge, and it was a recognized challenge. So this is one of the things that we had on our radar for quite some time, and it will significantly help with a lot of the identified areas that, a missing piece of paper, or making sure that all aspects of an application must be uploaded before it becomes a complete application. So this technical aspect will help with many of the areas identified, specifically those recommendations that were highlighted there. Similarly, Western Union, it's a payment option that directly ties the payment to the student. In the past, through a wire transfer, if Uncle John was paying for Sally, the name would come through Uncle John, and sometimes it was difficult just through the payment process for us to reconcile that payment was for Sally. This now makes sure that all payments are directly connected to the student, which just makes some of that paperwork and the tracking much easier for us to do. So accounts receivable, accounts payable, it's all streamlined for us. The insurance provider, I mentioned some of the aspects that does. Most of the programs across the country have an identified insurance program, and it was a step that we took. So it's implemented this year. All students have to participate with our insurance on an RFP with a provider. It's an extensive insurance program that is geared towards international students and their needs. One of the things that the audit had identified was missing documents. I would say the majority of the time that missing document was the updated insurance policy. In the past, it was up to the parent or the student to find their own insurance policy and then provide us proof. And what we would find sometimes is people would buy insurance 2 months at a time, 3 months at a time. Some would buy it 6 months at a time. Some would have a full year. And then we'd be constantly trying to find out whose is updated, whose has expired. Did they actually maintain it after they showed us the proof? Is the insurance that they bought adequate when they're buying it from several different providers from several different countries? We're not always aware of how solid the insurance package is that they have, whereas now we can be very confident and comfortable that everybody has insurance. It starts September 1. There's a 14-day window with the company that if students have to arrive a little bit earlier, they are covered for an extended 14-day period, and it lasts for the entire school year. So that the management of that now has become much simpler, and we feel much more confident that all of our students have strong, extensive coverage. Agent agreement contract. Again, from the previous meeting that you had with the audit, we have agents that are immigration track or focused agents, and we also have education agents. So when the audit was referring to an agent agreement, it would be more on those who are education agents, because families will select their immigration agent and work with that person regardless if we have a contract or an agent agreement with them or not. And a lot of it stems to who gets the 15% commission and what is that 15% commission for. So we do have an agent agreement in draft. It will outline what we expect of the agent, what the agent can expect of our program, and what we expect of the students. And that's where we talk about how you get the 15% commission. All new agents now must submit an agent profile with references, and we conduct a reference check. Again, that is on the education agent side. It doesn't necessarily always happen on the immigration side because those aren't things that we can control. We have hired a consultant, May of 2021, for 1 year, and this person will help us with developing a strategic plan. Will also help us with some of the policies and processes that the audit has recommended and talked about. So we bounce those ideas off the consultant, who is very aware of programs all across the country. So it is our plan to have a strategic plan developed by November of 2021. Overdue tuitions. We have a couple of policy, new policy pieces in place that will help us with this. Students will now be required to pay their tuition previous or prior to receiving their letter of acceptance. So that means they need the letter of acceptance to get their federal study permit for permission to enter, and we won't issue that letter of acceptance now until we receive the tuition. So we won't be chasing tuition for new arriving students. We still have to come up with a very clear process of how we can capture tuitions from returning students. And again, when we're dealing with situations of immigration, and as Janet pointed out, when you can move from a fee-paying to a non-fee-paying, those are all family, real-life immigration situations, and they're not always clear and clean-cut. But we will have the policies to direct us as best as we can, and we also have to realize that we're working with real-life situations, and as a team, we make decisions, and again, following the Education Act and following federal regulations as they pertain to us as well. Some of the other items that were identified, keeping the minutes. It's our practice. I have a written agenda that I send to the deputy prior to all of our meetings, so we have those. But we have committed to making any significant strategic or operational decisions will be documented. We will have the strategic plan. I think another thing that would be very important, and it was highlighted in the audit report as well, is to have a policy guidance document. And we'll definitely be starting to create those to go along with the fact now that we have the Western Union, the True North, the insurance, some of those other pieces. We will have a policy guidance document. And again, we have to recognize that that guidance document will be able to guide us, but it will not give us a definitive answer on every situation that we're going to be faced with. We do report publicly in the annual report for the Department of Education. If there are other areas that are identified that we should be reporting on, that can be included in the policy guidance document, and we will be sure to also include those in the annual report of the department. And again, this is something that we will look at. We will have a process developed for September of 2022 where we can assess the student satisfaction in our program, both from our program perspective and also from those students who are using homestay services, so that we can have an evaluation and feedback from both. And that's an update on where we are with the recommendations.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much, Derek. Thank you. Okay, I'll turn to committee for questions. I'll start with Lynn.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for taking the time to come in today. It's certainly a lot easier to understand the scope of these things by having a conversation than it is just by reading the report, so I do appreciate your time on this one. The area I am most interested or concerned about is the homestays, and I'm sure that doesn't come as a surprise to anyone here. I was just hoping to get a little bit of clarity. We talked about the fact that there are 3 homestay companies on Prince Edward Island, and I'm just hoping you can help me differentiate between homestay companies and homestay providers. So are these businesses that scout out families who might be willing to accommodate someone? Perhaps you can just give me some clarity.
Sure. Homestay provider, homestay company would be similar. The other term that we use is host family. So host family is actually the residence where the student is staying. And typically, if they acquire a host family or a host company, the company provides the custodian, and the host family is the host family. The host families typically are not custodians when there is a homestay company in operation. So we have a homestay company, and they find host families, and they would go through the criminal record check, vulnerable sector check, home visit, regular check-ins. They have all of their processes as to how they find host families, how they maintain host families, how they communicate with host families, expectations of You know, the student has their own room, the quality of the room, feeding them the meals, all of those things are expectations that these companies would have. And then they find host families who meet all of those requirements, and they maintain communication with those host families while they have students.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the clarification on that. So how many host families would we have in the province, approximately?
Active host families, like the companies know how many host families they would have in their network. I wouldn't have that. I don't know how many host families each have active or inactive. This year, we will have 31 students in host families represented by 3 companies.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so I was curious about that because we had talked earlier in the presentation about how every child who comes has to have a custodian documentation, a relationship with someone, but that custodian is not necessarily someone the child knows and probably is someone they're going to have very limited interaction with because it's not the host family. Is that accurate?
It could be in that situation, yes. Yeah.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. So I think it's good that we do not have K to 6 in Homestay. Anyone young and particularly vulnerable is here with a family member. I think that's incredibly important. Largely, we're talking about older children, probably closer to teenagers, preteen teenagers, people who are going to be in a good position to communicate their own needs and how they're experiencing things. So I'm hearing that currently the department communicates with the school about the child and with the host family. Does the department communicate currently with the child about their experience?
We are part of the orientation process for all students. So all international students have to check in in the EAL FAL office. So they have a relationship with us from there. We don't develop a long-term, I don't develop a long-term relationship with them, but Janet's EAL FAL staff would if they require those services. So they have that direct connection. Or we have, in most of our schools, an identified person who is there for the international students. In one particular high school, it's the youth worker. In another high school, it's the vice principal. So when we go for an orientation meeting at the start of the year, either myself or Janet's staff are there with the youth worker or the vice principal, and all of those introductions and pathways are made to our students.
Lynn?
I know that you probably have other people on the list, Chair, so I'll try to be quick and then get back on the bottom if I
Sure.
can. But I'm curious if the teenagers, the older children, are experiencing concerns, if they are having problems that perhaps the family hasn't identified, but that the child, him or herself, is experiencing. What options do they have to communicate that? Because obviously they can't go through the family. If things are not going well, if they don't feel safe, if they're experiencing any sort of distress, what pathway do they have to get that reported and to get moved?
Well, it's a really good question, Lynn. One of the reasons that we established the center is so that we have that initial contact with the students. And when we provide support, if a student requires language support, there's a really close relationship that develops between the students and those language teachers. That's been an avenue that we've used for a long time because the kids feel safe. They'll definitely share those experiences. But in our experience, the homestay companies also have avenues. So whether that's a worker at the homestay company that has given their cell phone number out for a 24/7 call, whether they've said the counselor at the school is kind of your safe zone, kids generally have that availability. One of the biggest obstacles, though, to that is language. So until language is established, it seems to be more that it would be the itinerant teachers that get more of that information. Something that we didn't think to include, which is new and will pertain to the PEISP program, is we have a local company that's just developed an app where we can establish two-way communication with children and their families in their target language. So I can write a message and ask, how are things going? And the student receives that, whether it's in Farsi, whether it's in Mandarin, whether it's in Tagalog. They then can respond in their home language to me, and I will get that message in English so I can understand it. So that's going to be available for all of our immigrant and fee-paying students very soon. We're also getting that to the point where it will be a voice activated. So for families that don't have literacy, or for students that don't have the literacy skills, they will be able to do that just with voice, not with text. So those are two kind of new things that I didn't even think of sharing early on, but there'll be great benefits.
Okay, one last one.
Thank you, Chair. That is wonderful news. I think that has huge potential to be incredibly valuable. Just one last quick question, and then I'll land on the bottom of your list. Do you have a sense of how many complaints are registered in a year?
Very, very few. Complaints about like living arrangements would be very unusual. The types of issues that we would hear from students would be more the adjustment issue. And a lot of that is not, it's not really about a homestay family, it's about a new culture. And so we spend a lot of time in our school system working with individual students on that. Why is it different? Why is the food different? Why is it that, you know, the kitchen in my home family looks different than the kitchen in my country? Why don't I have the same foods? Why does the school serve different foods that I don't like? So those kinds of things we deal with on a very regular basis. Why is there not 7 hours of homework a night? Right? Those are adjustments, and so we work with children all the time to make sure that those types of transitional things become more familiar to them.
Even just another one that was this year, a student living on the ground floor in a split level referred to it as the basement, and then that had certain cultural connotations that they were living in a basement, and of course that didn't go over well, but it was the ground floor in a split level home. Mm-hmm. So those are the types of things that can come up, and we work to alleviate. And in addition to the initial question, I've had contact with parents. The student can go to their parent, who in turn comes back to us. Their agent, I've had contact from agents. If they're not feeling comfortable with somebody on Prince Edward Island, there is always home and then back to us, because we still maintain those connections as well with either the agent or the family at home.
Okay, Gord?
Thanks for coming in, and I think this is an important topic because as we talk about, you just talked about basements and stuff, you can imagine coming in from a new country, simulating into a different school in a different country. So I mean, these are all important topics and an important program to talk about. In 1920, the program saw, I think it was 137 students studying PEI, and it generated somewhere, I think it was $1.48 million. That's the numbers I have. Would that be the case, or is there outstanding fees out there anywhere, or I know the program's changing to a upfront model, but is there fees out there? No? Okay.
We're down to less than $16,000 from the 2021 school year that we're still trying to track down. But for the most part, we're able to eventually have all of the money that's owed. Or we've made the decision that it's not going to be owed. Yeah.
Gord?
So the 137, I might have missed this in the presentation. How many is in line for this school year coming in? I know you were talking about 43 new, 31 required homestay. So those are 70. I might have missed it.
Yeah, so right now we have 43 new applicants that we would consider confirmed. We have 53 potential returning students, but at this point in time, we have 13 of those have confirmed by paying tuition. Now, before the start of school, we're going to be somewhere between 13 and 53. Yeah, because sometimes we have a good record of the students who have graduated. Some students may need to return for one more year because they were in grade 12, but they might need another semester. And in some cases, the families have moved, and they haven't indicated to us that they have moved. So it's the same as on the immigration side. We don't know sometimes until the enrollment counts start when students are in school.
Gord?
For those that, when COVID happened, there was online learning. We could potentially be in online learning in the future. We talked about the English language requirements. How do you ensure that the international students who are paying a fee receive the English language training online, that they are paying the money? Is the standard moving online next year, if that potentially happens? Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because they're going to require more support.
To that, Gordon. In the spring, when COVID hit, the EAL staff mobilized really quickly, recognizing that not just our international fee-paying students, but all of our international students would be in a very vulnerable position. So we worked very quickly to move students online and to take up some of that responsibility from classroom teachers around the language piece then. And that propelled us to move the high school EAL classes, to which most of Derek's students, our high school students, are now all offered in an online fashion, in a synchronous online fashion. If we did have to move home, we would be able to do that asynchronously as well. But this past year, we served 7 different schools, mostly in rural PEI, and we had all levels of English language learners online in a very successful way.
Gord?
And that's great. That's great to hear, because I know it took the process of moving online is not easy, and I'm sure if I had hair, I'd have pulled it out too. And
To do it, I would have said, I can't do that, but I happen to have a couple of staff people who are amazing. And the success, the students, our international students probably know more about online education than any other students on PEI right now. They could do a course in it. And we originally weren't sure if it would work for really low language levels, but what we're finding is the engagement. If I'm an international student and I live in rural PEI, and I'm not sure if there's anybody else from my culture on PEI, all of a sudden we've opened up a web so that they're connecting with students from other communities, and they're starting to feel like they're not isolated anymore. So it's been remarkable. If you ever want to see that in action, we'd welcome you. Yeah.
If I may as well, one of the strengths that will be ongoing because of that great work, I think it was mentioned before, in ensuring that our students have the resources that they need regardless of which school we put them in. And one of the goals of our program is to have domestic diversification. So we would like to be able to put international students in more of our rural schools, because right now there's a strong dependency on some of the local schools. And knowing that we have that online capability, it's now more comforting to know that we could put 2 or 3 students in a school, even if there's not the EAL teacher there, because of this strong online program. It gives us a little bit more flexibility in the placement of students.
Gord?
yeah, thank you, Chair. Just keeping with maybe the COVID theme and how it's affected. Well, I mean, I guess we've all been a little bit, lenient with some different things as COVID has hit, and I just want to talk about recommendation 4.3, where we talked about collect overdue tuition fees, including these procedures within the policy guidelines. And we talked about 2 different things. You talked about 2 different things, Derek, how the policy is changing to an upfront model, but you mentioned family and real life situations for the families that are in. Well, I'm working with a constituent in my district that she's going through a real life situation, and without getting involved in it, it's a very heartbreaking situation where she wants to do everything right. Different situations change back home because of COVID, and now here she is, and she can't pay the tuition, and she's under an incredible amount of stress. How do you deal with those on on an individual basis? If I could get into the details of it, but I don't want to. But I mean, we have to look at some exceptions. We've made some exceptions in society around COVID, and are you willing to look at any exceptions on a case-by-case basis if the family is struggling and has done everything right?
We always take a look at them on a case-by-case basis. We also have, we always look at them on a case-by-case basis. And you know, we try to make the best decisions that we can when we have perhaps different information than what's out there as well.
I think you might have seen, I've sent a letter to the Minister Jameson about it, and it's just, once you start to understand the story, you know, I know there's a lot of rules, but I appreciate that, so I may potentially speak with you after this. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Gord. Sonny?
Chair, thank you very much for coming in. Just a couple of questions. Lynn beat me to it on two of them, but how many dedicated staff do you have dealing with this?
So on the international student side, there's myself. We have an admin. Part of our program that wasn't part of the audit is also the affiliated school program. And that would be another topic altogether, but that person is there as well. So that we would have 3 on the international student program side, but we also work very closely with Janet's staff. So we sort of do the intake and the processing. Janet's staff would be doing the assessment, language assessment that are required, and then we work very closely back and forth.
Sonny?
We have a fleet right now of 35 language teachers that travel across the province. We have 9 youth service workers. Those youth service workers are, well, we have 2 new positions, one in West Prince and one in the Summerside area. Their role is to support the students in a transitional manner with those cultural nuances. We have 2 assessment specialists, and we have a teacher support specialist who supports on the teacher side. So in total, we're almost at 50. And as numbers increase, not just on the fee-paying side, but on the side of immigration, we often have to look for additional staff because immigration, as you know, population growth we've grown. And so to continue supporting the way we do. And I will say that our model is viewed across the country as one of the best models in the country, mostly because we're a small province. So we can know the students, we know the schools, we know what's going on. We have that connection year over year with students. We're constantly monitoring how the language progress is going, as well as all of those other things.
Sonny?
The Homestay Companies, you indicated there was 3. Does that go out to RFP, and is it a 3-year contract, or are they local companies, or are these I've never heard of these type of companies till I saw this. Can you give us a little bit more information on that?
2 of the 3 companies are local, and one of them it's a company that operates across the country. They're also an agency, so they would recruit their own students, primarily from Europe. And then they have a local person that's hired as the custodian. They have a very small network of host families that they work with, typically 2 to 5 students in that particular case.
Sonny?
And I'll pass it on
Sure.
as well. So you had indicated that your insurance was looked at, because that was a recommendation. What about some of the other issues, like there was their documentation for immigration, things like that? Did that get fine-tuned as well?
Yeah, so when a study permit expires, our previous practice would have been to physically go through the files to find the expiration dates, contact the family, find the email, contact the family, and go through that process. with True North now, study permits are uploaded with the expiration date, and we, as well as the family, are flagged well ahead of time that a study permit is about to expire, and that gives us enough time to make sure that the process is there, and True North will electronically help us with a lot of those physical tasks that were difficult before.
One more final question, it was more like a comment, like, so with the recommendations now being fulfilled, or before they were not, was there a possibility that the province could have been liable on any of these issues?
Pardon me?
Could there have been liability towards the province on some of the recommendations that weren't fulfilled?
I'm not a lawyer, but I guess if you look at, there's always a case of liability in everything. I think one of the things that we look at is what is the due diligence that we have done, and you know, we've recognized the areas that we have, and we've put a lot of effort into correcting them. Again, there's always going to be some form of liability.
Corey?
I'm next. Thank you, Chair. Which schools are most students? Is it usually in the Charlottetown area, Summerside, or is it kind of spread out across PEI, or?
For the fee-paying students, this upcoming year, the three high schools, Bluefield, Charlottetown Road, and Colonel Grey, would see the most of our students. I think what Janet would relay with the immigration patterns, that is starting to change in demographic a little bit. But as far as the fee-paying students, typically we would see them in the Charlottetown Bluefield area. Again, that's where most of the host families currently are. So that typically is where they go. And if they're fee-paying status with a family, and the family's making the decision, families tend to move and rent or purchase their house in Charlottetown.
Corey?
And so does the student get to choose, or the family get to choose which school they would like to go to? Is that how it works? Or is it?
The families, in the family case, they certainly get to choose. In the case of the student, at this point, there is a great deal of choice, and we would like to move to a situation where we are offering a balance of choice and a little bit of direction. So when we're accepting a fee-paying student, ideally we want it to be complementary to our system. And in order to be able to do that, we would like to have them in schools that are not already under pressure. So that's where the program side of things come in. When we go to recruit in certain countries, we could say, you know, these are the 6 schools that we have space for international students. And, you know, you can make your choices from these 6. If it's a family who's moving in, it's harder for us to say, you can't. Now, one of the things that the audit did was compared us to Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, and an important distinction between their program and ours. The Nova Scotia and New Brunswick programs only deal with the true international student, the program student. If they're not staying in their homestay, and both of those provinces do internal homestay. If they don't stay with their homestay, they go to the board. So the boards deal with all of the messier ones that we also have to deal with. So for New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, it's quite simple. You're in our homestay program, these are your choices, and so the program, the dates, everything is nice and clean. We have aspects of that, and we have aspects of the more complex ones. And because we are a department and we're government, immigration is also important to us as well. In most other jurisdictions, international student programs operate at the board level, not at the department level. So boards aren't as invested in immigration strategies. They are concerned about their schools and enrollments, and they make their decisions solely on that. Whereas again, we have the balance of both because of who we represent and the nature of our work.
Corey?
Earlier, Derek, you had mentioned a memo to Treasury Board that was, I guess, not approved or perhaps sent back to kind of change or whatnot. Can you just elaborate on that?
I'm not sure, Corey, how much I can elaborate because the process is still it's still alive at this point in time in procurement.
And just basically, the direction we received was denied at Treasury Board. I believe that was the term that was used. I think it was in the letter, so I don't think I'm saying a secret. But it was denied, but just the direction that we were going in, we're going back to look at it. I feel it'll be a better direction, and just the fact that we want to do this right, so we're taking the time to make sure it's done right, because as Lynn had, alluded to, it's Homestay is a vital component of the whole program, so we want to make sure it's done right. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Corey?
So I guess I'm just asking because you brought it up, Derek, so, and I can't quite recall what you said before. You'd said that a memo went to Treasury Board and it was denied. So is this on like the policies and procedures for the program, or is it, I guess that's what I'm just curious. I'm not looking for, this is exactly what it was and this is what we're doing, what we need to change, and this is what Treasury Board said. I'm just kind of looking for a general understanding of what.
It would be a policy, it would just be the,
Just the RFP process that's just how we were going about it. It's just going to be changed, and we, as Derek said, we're having conversation with finance and with procurement to figure out the best path forward. But once we have that all finalized, and we hope to have it done, as Derek alluded to, I think December, right? So once that's done, we'll report back to the committee, so, yeah.
Corey?
In February, in the AG's report, and I think you might have referenced this, Derek, there was a business plan developed February 2020, but it hadn't been implemented or anything done. I guess, where's that at, or where was that at, or will that be used with the strategic plan, or?
yeah, there have been various different, whether they were called business plans or strategic plans, over time, different plans of some nature have been submitted. Not necessarily always acted upon, and that's historic over many, many years. I think what we see now with the creation of this position is a commitment to move forward. So the plans that have been in place before will be dusted, where things are still appropriate, and with the addition of the consultant, it is our intention to have an approved strategic plan or business plan, whichever term ends up being used, for us to follow.
Is there any reason why that plan wasn't used?
Well, I think, when we talk about this program, so 15 years ago, it was set up, and as Janet had said, the resource center, but we went from 300 children in our system, immigrant children in our system, to almost today over 2,300. So the primary focus was on the student, and it should always be, and that's what it was. And then when Derek was put in this position in 2019, that's what we foresaw, that, we can grow and we can expand this program, and then and then of course the lovely C word hit, COVID. Yeah. So COVID hit, which kind of stopped some of those plans, but there is a draft plan that exists, but as Derek said, we have a consultant in place now that and we're getting the policies and procedures in place so that we should hopefully be able to have that completed by, again, November. And again, we'll make sure that that's made available to the committee.
So, Chair,
Yeah,
so who
Corey?
wrote that plan, that business plan?
That was created by Kieran Hennessy, who was the person in the affiliated school, the former affiliated school coordinator, and myself.
And I know you did mention, Bethany, that, 15 years ago, but this plan was only written a year and a half ago, 18 months ago. Is none of it any good, or is it? I guess I'm just confused of why we couldn't, why that plan wasn't acted upon, or that business plan, or whatever you want to call it. But
I think a lot of it would still be very much applicable, and when that plan was written, we were not in the throes of COVID and didn't anticipate the challenges that COVID would present to us. So hopefully once we're able to get COVID out of the way, we can return ourselves to that. COVID has certainly impacted our numbers in terms of quantity. But one of the things, as Gordon had mentioned, every case now has become much more complicated. Even the straightforward cases, in order for a student to get from country A to PEI, the steps in the processes and the paperwork that we go through to process that one student is probably fivefold compared to what it used to be. So it's just put a crunch on everybody's time. And then as well, a lot of the things in that strategic plan would require our legal support, support from different government entities who have also now been prioritized by COVID, and rightly so. So once COVID hopefully moves away and the work of legal teams and other government entities are able to focus back on some of the other core work that we do, we'll be able to move forward with those items in a newly developed plan.
And I think it's also important to note that some of the things that were pointed out in the auditor's report were things that would have been also in our previous plans, and I think were and are being worked on. So I think the documents that Derek and Karen have prepared do touch on a lot of those points, and I think the program is really an evolution. I think when we talk about the number of years that this has been underway, there's been lots of learnings, and I think those will be incorporated too as we go forward. So I think, we're moving more to a true ISP program, like as Derek references with New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. They're dealing exclusively with students that are coming from other countries. For that, they're not necessarily focused on immigration. So I think as we progress with that, I think these things can all be incorporated in future plans.
Okay, move on, or you have another question? Pardon?
A few more, if that's all right.
I just got Sid's on the list as well, so perhaps give you two more and then I'll move on?
Sure.
Okay. I'm being generous.
If I wanted to become an education agent, what do I have to do right now to become one?
If you want to be an education agent. I don't think it's a legislated world, so those technical aspects, if you want to work for us, our form would ask you what credentials you have in your home country, your business name, your business entity, all of those types of business questions, and we would be asking for references from K to 12 programs in Canada that you have worked with.
Corey?
Those processes just start lately, or because I think, did the AG say that there is no formal?
In terms of the formal profile form, that is new. And the agent agreement, again, that's one of those things that's on the docket for us to go back and forth and feedback with legal to get that final document, but we do have a draft. We do have a draft there.
Corey?
Go to Sydney.
Okay, I'll come back. Sid?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for coming in. A couple good lines of questioning there. Actually, the first I hadn't thought of before today, but that direction of students towards certain areas of PEI or where they choose to go as well. Certainly, I guess what comes first, chicken or egg kind of thing. Like if you have a school that doesn't have EAL support, certainly no one's going to be gearing students towards that. But if a family or an agent or the department wanted to have international students in a school that didn't have that support, there's a lot more for me to think about before I question or submit questions on that. But does that happen where you have say a host family in rural PEI where there's no EAL support in the school? Are we ready to step up with that additional support for that school? Because there's a lot of advantages to introducing new international students to say a rural school as well.
Derek, do you mind if I?
No, obviously.
Sorry.
Relief.
It's interesting, we have to step up whether they're fee-paying students or they're immigration students. So right now, if I'm thinking about how the summer's unfolding, we have families settling in school zones, in schools, where we've never had EAL students before. So one of the things I do is keep my eye really closely aligned to that, and I don't do final assignments of my teaching staff right away, because we never know where students and families are going to be. The other thing is, we do a consistent intake, so it's constant through the school year. We have to build that flexibility in with our teaching staff so that we can actually move if we need to do that to provide that service. And that is a commitment we've made. Regardless where a family is, if you require language support on PEI, we will be delivering it to you. And it's one of the reasons we developed the online program.
Sid?
Thank you, Chair, and I know it's not a big part of I guess the direction of what the AG was talking about too, but it's quite interesting, and you know, and a whole number of factors would make your August, I'm certain, you know, vacancy rates certainly would start driving things away from your usual places of placement too. So I'll back onto a bit, following more of what Corey had talked about as far as that proposal to Treasury Board. Is that in regards to what the AG had asked for as far as the contractual agreements with agents? Is that in direct response to that?
It is, and it's, when we look at what, again, when we have the ISP program and we have students who don't require, so what we want to be able to, what happens currently if a student approaches, what is on our website is that the PEI ISP does not arrange homestay or custodians. That's a decision that has to be made by the family. Here are a couple of options that you may want to explore. And on our website currently, we have Study Abroad Canada Limited, and we have Canada Homestay Network. So that's there, but it's strictly a hands-off type of scenario. What the CAPC standard would be and what we would like to be, and I think what the audit is saying, is when we are asked by a student that we've recruited or expresses an interest in coming to PEI and requires a homestay, we should have a solid or more than one solid options for that student that we do not currently have. You know, there's other conversations that happen. You know, are we a regulatory board evaluating every host family? You know, we have aunts and uncles making decisions to send their children, and we have people sending their children with friends, and that's where the federal custodial documents and all of those things come into play. We just want to ensure that a student that we've recruited, when we're asked for an option on homestay or homestays, we have something more than just our verbal understandings and our long-standing relationships with the homestays, that it's something more formal. And we want to be able to have that option or options.
Sid?
Thank you, Chair. So like the recommendation 4.43, the Department of Education and Lifelong Learning should develop and implement a standardized contractual agreement for education agents in accordance with the Treasury Board policy. So is that what the proposal to Treasury Board was? Is
No,
that these are belong to different
deals with agents, which is different than the homestay.
Sid?
So sorry, again, with the presentation, can you, is that being addressed now? Like, does it, I think you said you had a draft agreement then, or a draft per contract? Is that what you were talking about?
4.43, we have a draft agent agreement, yes, so we're working through that process. In the meantime, we do have an agent profile form that must be completed, and we do reference checks. So, for example, this year we are working with 5 new agents that we have not worked with in the past. They have submitted their profile to us. We have conducted the reference check on those 5. And I think we have 16 active agents. Those would be agents that have students with us that are on the education side. Again, when we talk about agents, there's a big world. There's the immigration agents and there's the education agents. And, you know, the scope of the audit, the terminology and the focus was on education agents and kind of through that blanket. But again, our scope goes beyond that, so it's more difficult for us to have those agent agreements with an immigration agent. That's beyond our scope. It's not what we do.
Sid?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can appreciate that. So until the draft agreement becomes permanent, what can we do publicly, I guess, to appease, elected MLAs, the AG, as far as making sure the background checks are done, those interviews are done, the credentials are verified with the agents? Like, what can we do in the meantime until that is permanent?
I'm sorry. I'm not sure if we're discussing the agents or the homestay.
Homestay.
Sorry, I said agents. Homestead, the
homestay companies, the 3 homestay companies.
That's what I'm talking.
Yeah, we understand what their policies are and their process to select host families. It's not written at this point, but it's on their website. It's part of their practice, and they have been longstanding companies with us. So as we've operated for the past 15, 20 years with these companies, with the relationships that we have, we will keep those checks and balances in place until we have that formal paper side of things and that contract side of things.
Sid? Okay, I just have a couple of questions before I come back around. Chair's prerogative. Coming back to around the homestay, which was sort of, I think, an area of, as Lynn had mentioned, an area of concern in terms of sort of 2 angles. One of them is obviously the safety of the students themselves, and also the legal liability, which is certainly what the AG raised as the other aspect of concern for the province itself. And following on from my colleague Sid's comments, to be really clear, that the current 3 homestay providers in the province, so you've Canada Housing Network, Study Abroad, and then one other provider, we do not have contractual agreements in place with any of those organizations, formal contractual agreements. Is that correct?
Correct.
So we are relying on the goodwill and the reputation and the long-standing working relationship for things like criminal record checks. Is that correct?
We are, and again, it's the, and I can't speak for risk and legal, but the language that's on our website right now, the PEI International Student Program does not arrange accommodations, homestay, or provide custodians for international students. The following is for information purposes only, and families are free to seek out other homestay providers. So, when we think about Sunny's question about liability, in some legal risk opinions, we don't have risk or liability because we are not arranging it. It is up to the parents to arrange. So it's...
and absolutely understand that, and I know that was something we discussed when the AG was here as well. I think certainly perhaps the challenge for that as people who are also legislators is, and who are, as Gord mentioned, who actually deal with the families themselves, and I know that from both perspectives, from people who are providing homestay and from those who are the students, and worrying about the care and the risk for the kids themselves, is that concern of we often forget when we talk about policies and contracts that they're there for a reason. They're there so we have something we can do.
Right.
And the last thing anybody wants is for us to say, well, why didn't we do something about that when we knew? So it is very encouraging that this is happening now. It's really worrying that it went for such a long time without that additional level of protection in place. Because as you mentioned, it's not going away. And our immigration policy is aggressive. You mentioned 2,300 current students. Now, I recognize not all of those are EAL. Do you have any number of how many of those are needing EAL support right now out of our student body?
We have almost 900 that would have EAL support coming in. And when I say that, I mean direct language support. And then because we support kids when they first come, we tend to be the first point of contact in the schools for them because we're a safe place. That number will probably increase this year as border restrictions change.
So the process that we kind of can't talk about, which is the RFP to Treasury Board, which is for contractual agreements I will say it, is contractual agreements with homestay providers, and you're just hoping to have that confirmed by December of this year?
Hopefully, maybe even earlier, so,
Okay.
but yes.
Okay.
It's ongoing right now, and just as of yesterday, we had meetings again with procurement and financials, so.
And then the policy work that's required to support that is also ongoing within
Yes.
the department?
Yes.
I guess my other last question on this one is, one of the things that had been raised during the report, speaking about the EAL, is that 24% of the international students in a sample that was taken were able to opt out of language assessments. Would you be able to speak to that?
Our language assessment involves what we call a level B assessment. And a level B assessment requires that we receive parental or guardianship consent. And so all of our families, whether they're fee-paying or non-fee paying, go through a consent process at the very beginning, both to complete the assessment and to share the information with the school system. I understand that the sample that the auditors would have done looked really high. One of the reasons for that is there was some students in that sample that would not be required to do the assessment because they had already done some of our courses in an affiliate school. So the results were a bit skewed. We don't have very many students in the end that opt out of language assessment unless they've done such things as IELTS or TOEFL in advance.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. If I come back to committee, Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I just have one last question or theme, I suppose. Your response might give me another question, but we'll see. I'm jumping off of something that my colleague Corey had said about education agents. And we don't have a legislative process that sets out how that looks, but we've seen measures being introduced with the proposed Temporary Foreign Workers Act, for example, to regulate agents. And I wonder if there is any thought within the department of doing so with education agents.
CAPC is one of the it's a national organization that we're involved with. CAPC has a very strong relationship with international agents, and they attend agent fairs and they bring in agents. So in our national network, it's regularly communicated who are strong agents. There's also warnings go out if there is any kind of an issue with payment safety, procedures that we would not be comfortable with in our Canadian context. So we do have that national organization. Again, it's not necessarily regulatory, but it certainly does communicate on a regular basis areas of strength. And I think it's also important to recognize that international education and international experiences for a lot of countries is seen very differently than we view it here. In some countries, it's a graduation requirement, or it's something that's deemed very, very important. And in Canada, as a federal government, with the EduCanada brand, spends a significant amount of money marketing Canada as a study destination. So a lot of the students and families are people who are looking for an international study abroad opportunity. And we would like to put these things that the audit had suggested, that our business plans have talked about, that this government has seen a little bit of a strategy for. We want to be able to put those things in place so that PEI can be a part of the study destinations when people are looking at Canada. Because a lot of times they know Canada, that's where they want to go, and then they'll start to do some homework from there. And we want to be able to put PEI on their radar as a study destination.
Maybe I was just going to add, Derek, it might be beneficial to just mention some of the criteria that Sydney had talked about, the agent agreement, that once we have that in place.
For the homestay?
No, for the agent, for agents to have a contract and agreement with the agents. Some of the criteria.
I don't have actually, you know what, I haven't looked at the agent agreement. It's the focus has been on homestay, but in the agent agreement, it very clearly outlines what we expect of the agent, especially in terms of communication, maintaining the open line of communication between us and the agent and the family. just making sure that they understand the processes and all of the documents that need to come, and that they're representing PEI as an education destination. The agent actually has to be promoting Prince Edward Island. So the commission is more for being a representative of our program versus somebody walked into your office who wanted to go to PEI, and you're going to be able to benefit from it as well. So there's expectations of promoting our program, how you promote our program, the language you use when you're promoting our program. Those things are all built into the agent agreement.
Lynn?
Thank you,
You
Chair.
good? Corey, did you have a follow-up?
No.
You okay? Committee? Gosh, you've all gone very quiet all of a sudden. The question for you is, given obviously there were some concerns that were raised in the report, which is why we asked you to come in, and obviously we've had the committee ask, very specific follow-up on that one. But I am also hearing, that very strong thread, you just mentioned it, about the connection, the very strong link to the immigration strategy. And so I imagine when you're developing a strategic plan for this, there is a connection to that strategic plan. Do you have sufficient resources, or will you be identifying the additional resources that you may need? Because a strategic plan would have outcomes that you expect and what you need to get there. And what does that look like? What will that encompass additional resources from an educational perspective and or from an administrative perspective to support this program?
Yeah, I think the strategic plan would identify those areas, especially in terms of the growth.
Yeah.
So one of the things we really rely on Janet's staff and our schools to do an exceptional job in welcoming our students. One of the pillars that you would see in other education programs is a strong orientation program, where we maybe put on a day or 2-day event prior to the students starting school, where they come and we teach them about PEI and schools in general, not specifically their school. So those might be things that are identified that we can take some of the investment from their tuition, reinvest back into the program to make sure that we're providing all of the services. I think one of the goals of the strategic plan that we would see is that everything should be cost effective as well. We should be able to enhance the opportunities for our PEI students to experience international students and every good thing that they bring. We should be able to promote our province and our excellent school system to international students, and we can do it and generate revenue as well. And that shouldn't be our primary, and it isn't our primary focus, but it can be a benefit to a strong international program that provides students with best opportunities.
Will there also be an aspect of that strategic plan that looks at the well-being of the students?
Absolutely.
As a performance outcome?
Yeah.
And is there a point that we have to assess the impact on our overall education system?
Yes. Yeah.
Because when you're hearing about this kind of growth, there is a point where exponential growth is not sustainable.
Correct.
I think it's fair to say, though, that the strategic plan will probably happen in phases. Like, we're probably going to phase it in. And I think some of the topics that were talked about being more strategic, those will be elements that will probably happen in the earlier phases of the plan. And then, depending on issues, will be expanded upon.
Yeah. No, fair enough.
With the program, it's an application-based, so we can set our target, say we have the capacity for X amount of students, and when our program reaches that, we don't accept any more applications. Now, of course, we're still going to have people who land here, and they may be on the fee-paying side, and that has to be built into our decision-making process. Yeah, but all of those things would be part of the plan.
Okay. Did you have any other comments that you wanted to share with the committee on this process or on any of the activities relating to the International Student Program?
No, I think we appreciated the opportunity to come and clarify, and we're very passionate about what it is that we do. And I think it has great benefit to our province and to the international students, so we appreciated the opportunity to explain what it is that we do on a daily basis and some of the decisions that may have seemed clear-cut in one case but aren't always.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time. I know this is, again, busy time of year for everybody, and for you to take the time out today to do this. It is really important that we do this, though, in a public meeting where we can have this conversation, because it does really help, you know, not just the committee members, but anyone else, you know, who wants to know what's going on behind the scenes. And the AG report does give us the opportunity to open that door. So thanks again. And what we'll do is just take a brief recess to reset and allow you to gather your stuff, and then we'll continue with the rest of our agenda.
Thank you.
Okay, we're back at the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. We have just a couple of pieces of correspondence to review. First note is that there is a survey that came from the Auditor General just to the members of this committee. Feedback can be sent via mail, hard copy mail if you so desire, or by email. And you can choose not to submit your name if you want to send it in an unmarked envelope, that's fine. But can you please do the survey? Oh, good job. All right, yes, and we can get that over back to the AG, that would be very helpful. You keener. And then the other piece of correspondence that was shared by email was the letter that was sent to the Premier from the Auditor General regarding the COVID-19 pandemic response and their proposed recommendations. I had sought confirmation that this letter was okay to be shared with the committee, which obviously it is, but this was following on from some comments that the Auditor General had made when he was here doing the initial COVID-19 report. And there were two aspects, I think, that are kind of key in that. One of them is that the intensity and volume of the work that audit has created for his department and how that's impacting other work that they can do. And the likelihood, in his opinion, that he will find similar recommendations in the ongoing audit work to be done. So despite the fact that the letter is addressed to the Premier, it would be appropriate for this committee to consider its thoughts on that for the Auditor General. I don't know if you're ready to do that now, if you'd like to have a think about it a bit further. We do have another meeting scheduled in a few weeks. And so if the committee is okay, I would suggest that we let the AG know that we intend to respond to this, that we would like to have some time to come up with our response. And then if you can do that for the next meeting, would that be okay with the committee? Yeah? Sydney?
Thank you, Chair. So why should we weigh in?
As Public Accounts Committee, when the Premier made the request that this audit happen, and that goes to the Auditor General reports to the Public Accounts Committee on those findings. So even though he has sent this letter to the Premier, the responsibility for sort of reviewing, for that work happening and then that work being reviewed happens here in Public Accounts. And so that is the public aspect of this work happening. And if you remember, the original reason for it having gone to that recommendation was because we were in the legislature doing it, and so it didn't happen in public there. So this was the alternative. Certainly, the Auditor General has made it clear that this is work that would be done in the public space. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the intent from the original request from the Premier as well. I would certainly take direction from committee, however, on that, and obviously it's not my decision, but it was my understanding of it, having discussed it with the AG. Sydney?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and I certainly don't speak for Executive Council or the Premier, but I'm sure they would like to know what our committee thought of it too, because it's I don't want to say it's an awkward situation, but basically, in simple terms, the AG feels that not a lot's going to change with 2 more full reviews, but it probably puts the Premier and Executive Council in a slightly awkward situation by saying, no, don't do a full detailed one when the AG says it. So I suspect, our Public Accounts Committee with 3 parties represented, that opinion would weigh into it for sure. So I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, thank you. I agree completely. I think it would be as non-partisan as we can be, because we are equally balanced in this committee, that if we made a comment on that would be more helpful for the conversation. I think one of the things we need to consider as committee members is what is in the best in the public interest, what is in the interest of the work we were asked to do in reviewing that. So if you can have a think about that, perhaps if we want to have a conversation offline or in camera as well, we can also arrange that. What I'll probably do is do a follow-up email to the committee with a couple of options on maybe either an in-camera discussion or prior to the next meeting, or a very clear request for feedback by that meeting. Sid?
Thank you, and the clerk had sent this letter around previously as well from the AG. And I know when he was in previous, he just kind of left it that he was thinking about, you know, what he was going to put in the letter and stuff too. And I noticed in the letter it talks about, you know, doing a summary information report for phase 2 and phase 3. I guess I'll say it sounds more detailed than what he had mentioned at the last meeting. So it sounds like, you know, it comforts me more than just not doing anything for phase 2 and phase 3. So I like where this was going with it. So, I mean, I'm prepared to speak to it now, unless the committee wants to wait till the next meeting.
You'd prefer to wait?
I would.
I know, Sonny, new on committee, it's a bit of a pressure to put on you. Would you be okay with that, Sid, if we waited a bit? Okay.
Just to avoid making decisions off camera, would it be okay to leave the discussion for the September 28th meeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's we've got a pretty clear, like I said, outline in there. If there's anybody has anything that they think of in the meantime, i.e. like, do you want the AG to come in and speak to it further or whatever, but then we can arrange that as well. So we've got some flexibility. Sydney?
Chair, sorry, what did you say, the September 28th meeting?
Yeah.
Yes, that's the next scheduled meeting.
Yeah. Sydney?
I feel like that's a long time to wait to give the AG's office direction. They said they have a pretty heavy workload. I would like to be able to give our feedback sooner than in another month's time. I don't know if the rest of the committee feels they need a month to do it.
Why could we not meet next week?
Yeah.
That is quite a ways away. It's almost a month.
It is. I can reach out to the AG on behalf of the committee to find out their timeline, but we can certainly meet sooner than that as well. But I would agree that the worry is that the AG starts planning without a decision from us. Right, Gord?
I might be way off base, but can we, this committee, we did have training once upon a time from a national organization that kind of advised us on various things along the way. I don't know if it would be appropriate for the chair to have a discussion with that organization that kind of provides the committee guidance prior to that meeting, potentially the chair or the co-chair. Just to understand, I just don't want to make sure we miss anything and what's happening potentially nationally or in other provinces around such important.
Well, luckily enough, the national conference is next week, and I'm participating in it, so I'll have the opportunity to connect with people online and offline if we need to seek guidance. So no, I appreciate that, though. Yeah, it's a virtual one, so I'm not flying anywhere, but I'll be online for a couple of days. So, okay, so here's what I'm hearing, that we don't want to wait a full month before we make a decision on this letter. So we should have a meeting to discuss this. We should have that meeting not in camera, but in public. I can seek some guidance in the meantime from the AG, let him know that we want to have that meeting and get a timeline from him as well. So what I'll do is ask the clerk to reach out for some scheduling options with the committee for sooner than the 28th. Would that be acceptable? Okay, but after next week, because next week I'm at the conference and school starts that's probably, for some of us, so half of us, that's a big deal. Okay. Does that
Potentially the morning of the 14th.
something around that time frame? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that. Much appreciated. Watch for emails incoming. Okay. So in terms of scheduling, as we just discussed, we will then now be having a meeting in the interim, specifically on that letter. But then the next scheduled meeting is the September 28th one, which is with social development and housing, and that will be the Deputy Minister, Minister Keedwell, and others to BD. And that'll be specifically on the seniors housing programme and on the social assistance programme audit, as well as the Crown Corp governance survey. We had also asked for the COVID-19 financial support programmes as well. So what we'll do prior to that one is just have a bit more detailed summary, because there's quite a lot in that on what we're trying to get from, what we're specifically looking for from the department. Just because of the volume there, we don't want to sort of go in, not be able to get through the full agenda. It'll be quite a busy meeting. Is there any other new business that anybody has other than the meeting we just talked about to get added to our agenda? Upcoming? No? Okay. Well, on that basis, thanks very much for your input today, and our meeting is adjourned.